The Riverstone house was built in 1898 so that nobody would dare forget it. And in May of 2024, nobody wanted to remember it. It had 2 stories, 12 windows across the front, a long wrought iron balcony, shipped from Pittsburgh by rail down to the depot at Greenbrier Station, a front hall with hand-laid encaustic tile that still kept the pattern of open pomegranates, an interior staircase made of black walnut, milled from the hills near Cumberland Gap, a central courtyard with an old apple tree, a kitchen with a built-in wood-burning oven, a cellar meant for wine that never got used as a wine cellar, only as a junk room, 2 indoor bathrooms, which in their day were the height of luxury, a servant's room behind the kitchen, a backyard with a stone wash basin and a well 12 feet across, with a curb of hand-cut limestone and an iron pulley forged in the foundries of Knoxville. Mr. Anastasius Riverstone Caldwell, the first owner, was a junior partner in the Laurel Mountain Mills, the textile company that Senator Bennett had pushed into existence in 1899 with northern capital and labor pulled from the worn-out farms of the region. Mr. Anastasius had the house built to celebrate the birth of his second son and to quiet the talk in Sweetwater Hollow, the talk that had been going on for years about where exactly his money came from. He did not live in the house even 1 full season. He died in September of 1899 of inflammation of the liver. So said the death certificate at the county courthouse in faded purple ink, still legible a century and a quarter later. The house passed to his widow. The widow padlocked the doors and went to live with her sisters in Knoxville. The house sat closed for 27 years. In 1926, the second owner moved in, a fur trader from the Cumberland country named Ewell Fairfax Orton. He bought the house for 1/10 of its original value. He died 11 months after moving in. The cause listed was pulmonary complication, and like that, without anyone connecting the dots or comparing the records, a list began to form. By 2024, it added up to 7 owners, each one dead within a short stretch, some within a year, some in less. One lasted 18 months, and the neighbors called him the resistant one. Another, in 1989, arrived on a Saturday, slept 3 nights, and got up on Tuesday, only never to get up again. The town, which is a designated historic town, the cradle of the oldest apple brandy in the Appalachians, the birthplace of Governor Thomas Marshall Cole, on October 30th, 1873, the home of slow-cooked wedding pork with red sauce and walnuts, the home of Cole Brothers Distillery, which by 2024 had been making spirits for 125 years without interruption, the home of the red dust that rises in May and August. That town, we are saying, had decided sometime between the 1950s and the 1970s that the Riverstone house was cursed, that it had been built on top of a Cherokee burial ground, that Mr. Anastasius had sealed a pact into its foundation with something that should not be named, that in the courtyard a woman in mourning would appear, that the apple tree gave no fruit because its roots had found something, that the water in the well, if you leaned over at midnight and listened carefully, would whisper to you. Elwood Garrison Maddox, the official town historian since 1998, gathered these stories with devotion in a green leather notebook. He gathered them and polished them. He polished them and let them out at the Wednesday talks at the community center. He let them out and printed them in small tourist pamphlets sold at the entrance of St. Mary's Methodist Church. The legend of the house had become, by 2024, one of the cultural products of the town. It drew visitors, it paid favors, and here enters Rosalind Tilford Eskridge, 76 years old, a retired pharmaceutical chemist from the Department of Public Health, divorced for 22 years, no biological children, raised a niece who was now a doctor of internal medicine in Knoxville. She owned a small apartment in the Republic neighborhood of the state capital. She also owned a comfortable pension, the result of 40 years of analyzing table wines, well water, farm milk, home preserves, and finally, in the last 15 years of her career, the groundwater of the Cumberland Valley under the federal program for chronic endemic arsenic exposure. Rosalind had honey-colored eyes, very pale, so pale that in the desert light of the high country they looked almost yellow. She had a vertical scar 5 centimeters long on the back of her left hand from an accident with laboratory glass in 1981. She had the habit of writing everything down in pocket-sized hardcover notebooks. She had kept this habit since 1968, when she started high school in Knoxville. By May of 2024, she had 380 notebooks stored in a 3-shelf cabinet. Dates, temperatures, acidity readings, what she ate, what she saw, the color of the sky. Once, in 1992, she had recorded for 6 straight months the exact time the neighbor's cat crossed the fence. She was that kind of woman. And before we go any further, a word from the one telling you this. If you have a minute, and if the story is making you want to stay, leave me a comment. Tell me one thing, that's all, it's not much. Is there a house like this in your town, in your city? A house people tell stories about? A house nobody wants to buy? A house where people have died and the locals would rather explain it with a legend than with reasons? Write the name of your town, and if you know it, the name they give to the house. Give the video a like as well. That helps a lot to get this story out to more people who will understand what is being told here. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. That is all I am asking for right now. Stay with me. Rosalind learned about the Riverstone house by accident. In February of 2024, she went to the town for a small conference at the State University on water quality in semi-arid basins. She stayed 3 nights at a small inn on Main Street. She spent her free afternoon walking. She walked down to the farmer's market on the square. She bought peeled chestnuts. She bought sourdough bread. She sat on a bench in Courthouse Square and ate the bread slowly, watching a red dust sunset that lasted exactly 47 minutes, according to what she wrote down later in the notebook she was using that month, one with brown covers. Walking back to the inn, she saw the house. It stood on a corner of the historic district where Main Street meets Marshall Street. It had the long balcony. The 12 windows along the front were boarded up. The front hall door was closed with a large rusted padlock. The limestone of the facade was stained by decades of red dust and rain runoff. There was a sign taped with duct tape to one of the boarded windows that read, "For sale," and below that, a phone number written in black permanent marker. Rosalind took out the notebook and wrote down the address and the number. She did not know why. That night at the inn she dialed. A man answered who introduced himself as Attorney Lawson, the executor of the estate of the last owner. The last owner was named Frederick Trevino Carlton. He had been a public accountant in Cumberland City. He had bought the house in 2012. He had died in 2013 sudden heart attack at 59 years old. The heirs had spent 11 years trying to sell it, without success. The price that Attorney Lawson quoted Rosalind on the phone that night was ridiculous, so ridiculous that Rosalind thought she had misheard him and asked him to repeat it. The attorney repeated it. It was a Gilded Age mansion in the historic district of a registered heritage town, with a wrought iron balcony, encaustic tile floor, a walnut staircase, 12 front windows and its own well. And it cost less than the small apartment Rosalind owned in the Republic neighborhood of Knoxville. Why so cheap, sir? There was silence on the other end of the line. Then a small, uncomfortable laugh. Look, Mrs. Rosalind, I'll be honest with you. The house has a history. Here in town, people say things. I don't believe in those things. But I'll be honest with you. Tell me what things. That all the owners die. Rosalind wrote that sentence in the notebook exactly as the attorney said it. Then she added a period. Then below, on a separate line, underlined twice, she wrote, "Verify, verify." That word in Rosalind's head was not just any word. It was the central verb of 40 years of professional life. A pharmaceutical chemist does not give opinions. She verifies, she measures, she takes a sample, she brings it to the laboratory, she orders the reagents, she reads the result, she writes it down with its date and its hour and the ambient temperature. If the result contradicts what everyone believes, she writes it down even more carefully. Pharmaceutical chemistry is a trade of invisible things. She had once said this to her niece Marielle, when Marielle was still a medical student, a trade of invisible things because you find what the eye cannot reach, and then nobody thanks you for having found it, because people prefer those things to remain invisible. But somebody has to see them. Rosalind hung up with Attorney Lawson that February night and did not tell him yes and did not tell him no. She told him she was going to think about it, and she thought about it for 3 months. She thought about it on the bus back to Knoxville. She thought about it in her apartment in the Republic neighborhood, staring at the wall. She thought about it talking to Marielle on the phone on a Sunday afternoon, without yet telling Marielle what it was about, only asking her loose questions about chronic poisoning, about clinical pictures that get confused with other things, about the history of arsenic in the Cumberland Valley. She thought about it rereading old notebooks, the ones from the years when she was in the chronic arsenic exposure program, the notes on children from the valley with darkened palms, the notes on adults from Lexington County with neuropathies that the local clinic had diagnosed as diabetes. She thought about it one March morning when she woke up at 4 and made herself a pot of coffee with brown sugar and cinnamon and sat down at the kitchen table with a brand new notebook. The first of the ones she would use for this story, one with grey covers. In that notebook that early morning, she wrote one single line. If a house kills its owners, it is not the house. She underlined the word house the first time it appeared. She did not underline it the second time. She closed the notebook. She finished the coffee. She went back to bed and slept 4 more hours. In April, she called Attorney Lawson. "Sir, this is Rosalind Tilford about the house." "Mrs. Rosalind, I was beginning to think you wouldn't call back." "I'll buy it." The attorney took 2 seconds to answer. When he answered, his voice had a different tone, a tone somewhere between relief and something else, something Rosalind registered without naming it yet. "You'll buy it, just like that, without seeing the inside?" "I'm going to see the inside, but I'll buy it." "Ma'am, look, I have to tell you for ethical reasons here in town people—" "Sir, I am 76 years old. I am a retired chemist. I have lived alone for 22 years. I know what I'm doing. When do we sign?" They signed on May 16, 2024, at Notary Public Office No. 3 on Lee Street, across from the bandstand, where a trio of older men was playing bluegrass with banjo, mandolin, and stand-up bass. The notary, a woman in her 50s with thick-framed glasses, read the contract out loud. When she got to the clause that stated the property is sold in the physical and legal condition in which it is found, with no express or implied warranties, the buyer declaring she is aware of its history, the notary lifted her eyes from the paper and looked at Rosalind over the top of her glasses. "Are you sure?" "Ma'am, I am sure. We also have to sign an additional document the seller's family is requesting. It is a release. It states that the buyer declares she is informed of the background of the previous owners and absolves the sellers and this notary of all civil or criminal liability for any event that might occur." Rosalind did not laugh. She took the document. She read it through. It took her 4 minutes. She signed it with the tight handwriting of a chemist. The same handwriting as the 380 notebooks. When she stepped out of the notary office, with the deed in a blue plastic folder and the keys in her hand, 4 keys, 1 large rusted one for the main front hall, 2 medium ones for the interior doors, 1 small one for a padlock that would turn out to be on the junk room, the sky over the town was beginning to turn a dirty orange. A wave of red dust was coming in from the direction of the orchards. The air smelled of disturbed earth and dry plaster. Rosalind walked the 3 blocks to the house. She put the large key into the padlock of the front hall. The padlock yielded with a metallic crack that sounded like a gunshot down the empty street. She pushed the door. The door opened with a long whine of hinges that hadn't been oiled in 23 months. Inside, the house smelled of being closed up. It smelled of dry dust, of old wood, of something else that Rosalind could not place right away. A background smell, faint, mineral. She turned on the flashlight on her phone. She walked through the front hall. She came out into the central courtyard. The apple tree was there, exactly as she had imagined it. It was a large tree, old, with a thick, twisted trunk, with leaves that were green but dull. There was not one single apple on it, not one on the ground, not one. Rosalind took out the grey notebook. She wrote down the date, May 16, 2024. She wrote down the time, 6:47 in the evening. She wrote down the approximate temperature, 88 degrees Fahrenheit. She wrote, "Central apple tree, non-productive. Verify soil. Verify." That word. Again. She walked through the kitchen, the cellar, the servants' room. She came out into the backyard, and there, in the backyard, against the back wall, was the well. The limestone curb carved with floral motifs worn down by time. The iron pulley with the inscription, Knoxville Foundry Commodores 1898, still legible on its side. The rotted wood bucket resting crooked on the curb. The frayed rope wrapped around the rusted spindle. Rosalind stepped up to the curb. She looked down. It was dark. She could not see the bottom. Her phone flashlight only reached about 10 meters down. Below that, only darkness. It smelled of cold earth and something else. Something metallic. Something she knew without yet knowing she knew it. She wrote in the notebook, "Deep well. Mineral odor. Take sample as soon as possible." She closed the notebook. She went back through the central courtyard. She climbed the walnut staircase, which creaked under her feet like an old protest, up to the second floor. The bedrooms all had their furniture covered with white sheets. The sheets were no longer white. They were yellow with dust and time. She chose the master bedroom. She pulled off the sheets. Underneath was a wrought iron bed with a brass headboard, a cedar wardrobe, a bedside table with an oil lamp, a wicker chair, a Persian rug moth-eaten through the middle. She decided that night she would sleep there. She had brought her own sheets in the suitcase, along with the rest of the basic things. That first night in the Riverstone house, Rosalind slept 7 hours straight. She got up the next day, May 17th, with nothing strange. She felt fine. She wrote down, first night, slept well, no symptoms, bedroom air stale but no anomalous odors. She went down to the kitchen. There was no water from the tap yet, because the municipal connection had been cut off for years. That morning there was only the bottled water she had brought. She boiled water on a small, portable propane burner. She made herself an instant coffee. She sat down on the kitchen chair, a pine chair of the kind they don't make anymore, looking out the window onto the courtyard with the fruitless apple tree. She took a sip of coffee and felt, for a tenth of a second, a taste in her mouth that was not the taste of coffee. It was a light taste, faint, barely noticeable, like when you suck on an old copper penny, or like when you bite the inside of your cheek and taste the blood. A mineral taste, almost metallic. It passed. Rosalind took another sip of coffee. The taste was gone. It was normal coffee. Coffee, instant coffee, classic brand, 8-ounce jar. She took out the notebook. She wrote, May 17th, 7:14 in the morning. Faint metallic taste upon waking. Duration approximately 1 second. Intensity very low. General state. Well. Last night's hydration. 600 milliliters of bottled water, brand name. She closed the notebook. She did not give it importance, not yet. The first days in town were days of organization. Rosalind hired a man from the area, a Mr. Andrew Quinn, a retired electrician from the rural co-op, to inspect the electrical wiring in the house. Mr. Andrew inspected it. He said the wiring was old but not dangerous. He said 3 switches needed replacing and the bulbs needed updating. They did it. Rosalind paid. Mr. Andrew charged her less than the work was worth, and at the end, standing in the front hall before leaving, he said, Mrs. Rosalind, I was born here, and I'm going to die here. Let me tell you one thing. They didn't sell you this house. They gave it away. Do you know why? I know why, Mr. Andrew. And do you know why they die? Rosalind looked at him. Mr. Andrew was a thin man, tall, with a trimmed white mustache, hands stained from years of carrying wire. He had clear, serious eyes. He was not being dramatic, he was worried. No, Mr. Andrew, I do not know why they die, but I am going to find out. All right, I'm telling you. If you start feeling sick, leave without shame. Here in town, people will understand. Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Mr. Andrew left. Rosalind closed the front hall door. She wrote in the notebook, Mr. Andrew Q firmly believes in the curse. He is not superstitious by temperament. He is superstitious by accumulated evidence. Take him seriously. Take him seriously. That was different from believing him. A pharmaceutical chemist learns the difference early. Take seriously meant register the data. Don't dismiss it. Cross-check it later with other data. Build hypothesis. Verify. Verify. The word again. In the following weeks, Rosalind devoted herself to 2 things in parallel, without the town finding out about the second. The first was fixing up the house to live in it. She hired a woman to help her with the deep cleaning. Mrs. Cleophas Mireles Ballard, 68 years old, a widow, daughter of a worker at the Laurel Mountain Mills, who had lost his job in 1925 when the mill closed. Mrs. Cleophas was small, sturdy, with white braided hair gathered in a bun, always dressed in a blue and white checked apron over a dark dress. She spoke little. She worked a lot. The first day, while she was scrubbing the encaustic tile floor of the front hall with a rag and a bucket of soapy water, she said to Rosalind without looking up, "My daddy used to say that here, where the house stands, used to be a wasteland, and before the wasteland it belonged to the mill." "To the textile mill, not the main building?" "The backyard of the mill, where they used to dump things." Rosalind stopped what she was doing. She came closer. "What things, Mrs. Cleophas?" "Things. Dirty water, the leftover dye sludge, torn sacks, whatever was left over. My daddy used to say that when he was a boy, the smell here was unbearable, and the red dirt would turn green. My daddy said green, not bluish, not yellowish, green." "Green?" Rosalind took out the notebook, the grey one. She wrote fast, "Mrs. Cleophas Mireles B., involuntary informant, father worker at Laurel Mountain Mills, refers to historical discharge of textile effluents on lot adjacent to Riverstone House, or on the same lot. Green color of sludge discharged consistent with trivalent chromium reduced to metallic in clay soil. Chronology approximately 1899 to 1925. She closed the notebook. She asked Mrs. Cleophas 3 more questions. Where exactly was that yard? How long did the dumping last? If her father had at any point worked in the dye section. Mrs. Cleophas answered with the naturalness of someone repeating a family story heard 100 times. The yard was where the house stood, and 2 more lots to the east. The dumping lasted from when the mill opened until it closed. 26 years. And her father did not work in dyes, thank God. He was from the loom room. But his uncle did work in dyes, and he died at 42 years old of something that on his death certificate was called chronic kidney disease. Rosalind listened to everything. She did not say anything. She paid Mrs. Cleophas for the full day, even though she had only worked 6 hours. She asked her to come back the next day. That night, Rosalind went down to the courtyard with the apple tree. She stood under the big, fruitless tree. She looked down at the ground. The ground in the courtyard was red, dusty, hard, typical of the soil of the region. But around the trunk of the apple tree, in a circle 1.5 meters in diameter, the ground had a different tone. Slightly, barely. A tone that under strong light might look normal. In the faint twilight of May it looked greenish. Rosalind knelt down. She pulled out of her apron pocket a small Ziploc bag she had brought from Knoxville. From the other pocket she took a small sterilized plastic spoon in its wrapper. She took an aliquot of soil, 3 grams by the eye of a chemist, no scale. She closed the bag. She labeled it with permanent marker. RT001, Riverstone House, Central Courtyard Soil. Base of apple tree, May 23, 2024, 1842 hours. She stood up. Her knees hurt. But she stood up. That was the first sample. The next morning, before Mrs. Cleophas arrived, Rosalind put the bag in her backpack. She walked to the bus station. She took the first bus to Knoxville. She arrived at the State University at 11. She went by the analytical chemistry laboratory, where she still knew 2 people. She asked Dr. Renee Sinclair Oliver, a colleague of 48 years old, a research professor, to run a heavy metals analysis by atomic absorption for her, discreetly, without paperwork, as a favor between chemists. Renee accepted without asking many questions. She only said, "Rosalind, what are you up to?" "I'll tell you later, dear. For now, do me this favor. Lead. Total chromium and hexavalent chromium, arsenic, cadmium, mercury if you can manage it." "By when?" "Whenever you can. This week would be good." Renee kept the bag. Rosalind went back home that same afternoon. On the bus ride back, she opened the grey notebook and wrote, "Sample delivered to Dr. Sinclair, May 24, 2024, 11:14 hours. Pending result. Continue. Register own symptoms. Continue. Sampling of other zones of the property. Continue." That word again was important. A pharmaceutical chemist knows a single result is nothing. You need a series. You need a pattern. You need time. In the following weeks, while Rosalind's everyday life in the Riverstone house began to take shape, while she bought used furniture in an antique store on Lee Street, while she got to know the baker, Mr. Samuel Ibbott, who kept warm sourdough bread for her on Wednesdays, while she became a regular at the fresh juice stand of a young man who called himself Little Ray, across from the farmer's market, who sold her quince juice in a paper cup, while he told her his sister was studying nursing in Cumberland City, while she learned the names of the streets and the surnames of the old families, while all that was happening, Rosalind was, in silence, leading a second life. She took soil samples from 6 different points of the property. She took water samples from the well at 3 different depths, lowering an improvised bucket on new rope. She took root samples from the apple tree, cutting with a sterilized knife a secondary root 30 centimeters deep. She took leaf samples from the apple tree, from 3 different branches. She took samples of the dust accumulated under the eave of the long balcony, which had not been cleaned in decades. Each sample labeled, each sample dated, each sample recorded in the grey notebook. By June, the grey notebook was already half full. Rosalind opened another, one with wine-coloured covers. Renee Sinclair sent her the first results on June 14th by email. Rosalind opened them at a cafe with Wi-Fi on Main Street, a small cafe called the Clock Cafe, with wrought-iron tables out on the sidewalk. The results were preliminary, but they were clear. Soil from the courtyard of the apple tree. Arsenic, 142 parts per million. Total chromium, 380 parts per million. Lead, 95 parts per million. The permissible thresholds according to federal regulation for residential use soil. Arsenic, 22 parts per million. Total chromium, not regulated by name but international reference of 100 parts per million. Lead, 400 parts per million. That is to say, arsenic at 6.5 times above the threshold. Chromium at nearly 4 times above the international reference. Lead within the threshold, but high. Rosalind read the email twice. She closed it. She ordered another coffee. She took out the wine notebook. She wrote, June 14th, 2024, 11:18 hours. Clock Cafe. Preliminary results from Dr. Sinclair, soil patio. A 142 CR3L80 PB95. Pattern consistent with historical textile discharge plus possible geogenic contribution. Pending. Well water, roots, leaves. Request repeat sampling. Do not comment with anyone in town yet. Call Marielle. She called Marielle that same afternoon. She told her. Marielle listened in silence for 2 full minutes. Then she said, Aunt, come back to Knoxville. No, dear. Aunt, please. Marielle. I am a chemist. I have a hypothesis now, but hypothesis is not proof. I need to complete the series. I need the well water above all. I need the hairs. The hairs? My hairs, for analysis of chronic exposure, but not yet. I haven't been there long enough. I need at least 6 months. Aunt, you can die. I am not going to die, dear. I know what I am doing. That's why I am here. I am the first person to live in this house who understands what is happening. If I leave now, this stays hidden another 100 years. Another 7 owners. Marielle took a while to answer. When she answered, her voice was broken. Promise me you will leave if you start feeling bad. I promise you that I will record every symptom and that I will decide with data. Not with fear, and not with pride. With data. They hung up. Rosalind walked home. The sky was clean that afternoon. No dust storm. The desert sun of the Cumberland country fell on the limestone walls of the historic district houses and made them look golden. On the way, she crossed paths with 2 tourists, a young couple. She with a camera, he with a hat. They were taking photographs of the facade of the old post office. Rosalind thought as she walked past them that the image of the town those 2 tourists were going to take home would not include anything of what she was discovering. And that, she thought, was exactly what the town wanted. She arrived at the house. She opened the front hall. She went up to the master bedroom. She took off her shoes. She sat down on the wrought-iron bed. She looked at her hands. Her palms were a little darker than the back of her hands. Not much, just slightly, a very faint greyish shadow in the folds. If anyone who was not a chemist saw those hands, they would notice nothing. But Rosalind had spent 15 years of her career looking at hands like that, in the towns of the valley, in Lexington, in Calhoun, in Maryville. Hands of children and adults chronically exposed to arsenic in the water of household wells. Her hands. She wrote in the wine notebook, June 14, 2024, 1950 hours. Palmar observation, beginning hyperpigmentation, time of habitation, 29 days. Continue weekly photo record. Not the moment to leave yet. Not yet. And here, a pause. The town historian, Mr. Elwood Garrison Maddox, the one with the green leather notebook, is going to come on stage, but before he comes on stage, it is worth telling you who are listening to this one thing. Local legends are sometimes the costume a town puts on top of something it would rather not see. Not always out of bad faith. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is habit. Sometimes it is because the truth costs money. Or costs shame. Or costs having to change many things that are already the way they are. The legend is cheaper. The legend does not demand anyone do anything different. The legend even brings in tourism. But legends kill. Not the way they themselves say they kill. They kill another way. They kill because they cover up what is actually killing. Let us continue. The first encounter between Rosalind Tilford Eskridge and the town historian Elwood Garrison Maddox happened on a Friday at the end of June at the community center. During one of the Wednesday talks that month had been moved to Friday because the hall was occupied. The talk was titled, Houses with History, Houses with Mystery, the Invisible Heritage of Our Town. Rosalind learned of the event from a poster taped to the wall of the farmer's market. She decided to go. She arrived 5 minutes early. She sat in the back. There were about 30 people, most of them women from the town, some tourists, 2 young people with notebooks who looked like students. Mr. Elwood arrived punctually. He was a man of about 65 years, tall, sturdy, with a carefully trimmed grey moustache, hair combed back with gel, a cream linen suit, a sky blue shirt, a purple silk tie. He spoke with a theatrical voice, slowly, with emphasis on certain syllables. He had his audience in hand. He spoke for 40 minutes. He spoke of the Riverstone house. He called it the black jewel of our heritage. He told the story of Mr. Anastasius Riverstone Caldwell and the inflammation of the liver. He told the story of the fur trader from Cumberland. He told of the 7 deaths. He told of the Cherokee burial ground that might lie underneath. He told of the pact sealed into the foundations. He told of the woman in mourning in the courtyard. He told of the fruitless apple tree. He told of the well that whispered. In the last part of his talk, he said something that made Rosalind press the wine notebook against her lap. And very recently, dear friends, this house has been acquired by a person from outside our town, a lady already advanced in years from Knoxville. I do not know her personally, but I tell you with all due respect that it is our obligation as people of this town to take care of this history. The Riverstone house is ours. Its mystery is ours. And if you happen to hear strange things, if you happen to hear strange versions, if someone says things that do not square with what here our grandparents always knew, remember one thing, and I tell you this from the heart. There are truths that are truths of the town, and those are worth more than any piece of paper. He closed to applause. All 30 people applauded, some with enthusiasm. Rosalind did not applaud. When the room emptied, Rosalind walked up to the podium where Mr. Elwood was gathering his papers. She waited for him to finish talking to a woman who was asking him for an autograph on a pamphlet. When the woman left, Rosalind introduced herself. Mr. Elwood, good afternoon. My name is Rosalind Tilford Eskridge. I am the person who bought the Riverstone house. Mr. Elwood lifted his eyes. His eyes, small, dark, alert, took her in within 2 seconds. The smile that appeared on his face was a smile Rosalind knew. It was the smile of someone calculating. Mrs. Rosalind, what a pleasure, and how brave of you. Mr. Elwood, I would like to invite you to a coffee. I have some questions for you. By all means, Mrs. Rosalind. By all means. Tomorrow, perhaps? At 11 at the Clock Cafe. At 11, I will be there. They said goodbye with the formality of the town. Rosalind walked out onto the street. It was already night. The air had cooled. She walked toward the house. On the way, she stopped twice. The first time because she felt a slight dizziness, 3 seconds that passed on its own. The second time because she felt again the faint metallic taste in her mouth. This time it lasted a little longer. 4 seconds. 5. She stopped on the sidewalk. She pulled out the wine notebook. She wrote down by the light of the street lamp. June 28, 2024, 21:14 hours. Dizziness of 3 seconds. Faint metallic taste, 4 to 5 seconds. Time of habitation, 43 days. Meeting with town historian EGM scheduled for June 29th, 11 hours. Bring well water sample, labeled. Finish gathering evidence. Maintain discretion. She closed the notebook. She kept walking. The June moon was high over the town. It looked yellow, almost orange, because of the suspended dust of a distant dust storm. On the streets of the historic district, there was almost nobody. Only the sound of crickets in the courtyards and far off a song playing on a radio. It was the local AM station, a bluegrass tune from one of the old mountain bands. Rosalind recognized it. Her father used to listen to it when she was a child. She arrived at the house, she went in. She closed the front hall from the inside. She went up to the master bedroom. She sat down on the bed. She stayed there thinking for a long time, with the wine notebook open across her thighs without writing anything. 43 days in the house. Beginning palmar hyperpigmentation, episodic metallic taste, 3-second dizziness, soil with 3 heavy metals above threshold, and pending, the most important thing, the well water. The well water was the center of the hypothesis. If the well water confirmed what she suspected, the chain would be complete. If the well water did not confirm it, the hypothesis would weaken, and it would be necessary to open it up to other possibilities. Inhaled dust. Ingestion of soil through the vegetables from the kitchen garden. Skin contact. But the big suspicion was the water. She had taken samples of the well water in May. She had taken them to the university. Renee Sinclair had told her that those analyses would take longer, that for water the procedures were finer, that she should be patient. They had agreed to talk at the beginning of July. Rosalind thought that night sitting on the bed that maybe she could not wait until July, that the meeting with the historian the next day was going to open a war she was already sensing, that she needed to have all the data before the war began, and that if she wanted to be sure about the well water, the most prudent thing was to take a new sample, one she would take herself with all the protocols, an aliquot at different depths. A series. For that, she needed to go down into the well, not pulling water up with a bucket from the curb, that she had already done. That gave you mixed water. What she needed was to climb down by the iron ladder rusted into the inner wall of the well. A ladder Rosalind had seen the first time she looked down. A ladder that ran the full 36 feet down to the water. Climb down with sterilized jars. Take a sample at 1 meter deep, at 3, at 6, at 9, and at the bottom in contact with the bed. It was risky. A 76-year-old woman climbing down alone at night on a rusted ladder 36 feet deep inside a well, with jars in a small backpack. Risky. But she was the only person living in that house who could do it knowingly, and time, according to her own data, was not on her side. She decided she was going to do it that night, before the meeting with the historian, before the war began, before someone in the town, alerted by Mr. Elwood, began watching her seriously. That night of June 28, 2024, while the yellow, dust-stained moon slowly dropped over the orchards of the Cole Brothers distillery, while on the streets of the historic district only the crickets and a distant mountain song could be heard, while Mr. Elwood Garrison Maddox, in his house on Jefferson Street, was writing in his green notebook a new entry titled, "The Outsider, First Encounter." Rosalind Tilford. Eskridge got up off the wrought-iron bed. She put on old jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, work boots, a belt with a tool pouch into which she placed 8 previously labeled, sterilized 100-milliliter glass jars, a headlamp with new batteries, a pocket knife, a flexible tape measure, nitrile gloves, a new notebook, the 4th of this story with dark green covers, and a permanent ink pen. She went down the creaking walnut stairs. She crossed the courtyard with the fruitless apple tree. She crossed the kitchen, the cellar, the servants' room. She came out into the backyard. The limestone curb carved with floral motifs from the well of the Knoxville foundry of 1898 was waiting for her under the yellow moon. Rosalind stood in front of the curb. She turned on the headlamp. She made sure the belt was secure. She checked that the jars were well fastened. She breathed deep, once, twice. She lifted her right leg over the curb. She lowered her foot until she found the first rung of the rusted iron ladder. The rung held. She lifted her left leg. She stood on the first rung with half her body inside the well and half outside, looking one last time at the sky over the town and at the dark outline of the apple tree against the moon. She began to descend. Her foot found the next rung. The smell of cold earth and something else came up with her. She turned the headlamp on. And before I continue telling you what happened when Rosalind Tilford Eskridge reached the bottom of the well of the Riverstone house that night of June 28, 2024, before telling you what samples she took, what she saw on the inner walls of the well by the light of her headlamp, what smell she identified when she reached the bed, and before, above all, telling you what she did with those samples the next day, at her meeting with Mr. Elwood Garrison Maddox at the Clock Cafe at 11 in the morning, let me ask you one thing. If you have made it this far, and if this story is moving something in you, write it down in a comment. One word. 2. Whatever comes to you. And give the video the like that the algorithm needs to carry it to more people who will understand what is being told here. And subscribe, because what is coming next is the part that truly matters. The truth of the Riverstone house. And what the town decided to do with that truth when Rosalind put it in front of them. Stay with me. Her foot found the next rung. The rung held. Her foot found the next one. Her left hand did not let go of the edge of the curb until her right hand had found the first metal grip inside the wall of the well. Rosalind climbed down. She climbed down slowly, counting the rungs. 1, 2, 3, 4. At the 8th rung, she allowed herself to look down for the first time. The headlamp lit the inner wall of the well, carved limestone for the first 3 meters, then rubble stone masonry with lime and sand mortar. Then, lower down, something different, something darker. The stone changed tone. It turned greenish-gray in irregular horizontal bands. Rosalind knew what that was. She knew it without joy. It was the trace of an aquifer that had been washing salts from the surrounding rock for more than a century and depositing mineral concretions on the inner wall of the well. 15, 16, 17, 24 rungs. At the 24th rung, the headlamp lit the water. The water was still. It had a strange tone, neither transparent nor cloudy. It was a very pale yellow color, like very weak tea with an oily shine on the surface that reacted to the light as if it had a film on top. It smelled of wet metal, of an old coin, of a rusted pipe, and below that smell, another, of something organic, old, long decomposed, almost neutral, but present, a trace. Rosalind stopped at rung number 28, about 60 centimeters above the surface of the water. She took out the first sterilized jar. She uncapped it with her right hand. With her left she held on. She submerged the jar 3 centimeters below the surface. She let it fill up. She capped it under water. Correct sampling technique to avoid atmospheric contamination. She took it out. She put it in the belt pouch. She made a mental note. Surface water sample, depth 0. She climbed up 4 rungs. She took out the second jar. This time she lowered the jar with a short rope she had wrapped around the belt, down to 1 meter deep, measured with the flexible tape. She let it fill up. She brought it up. She capped it. She put it away. Water sample. Depth 1 meter. She repeated at 3 meters, at 6 meters. The rope did not reach for 9. That would have to be another night. The last jar she saved for the bed. For that she had to climb down to the water and put her arm in. She climbed down 2 more rungs. She knelt on the lowest rung. She plunged her right arm in up to the elbow. The water was cold, colder than she had expected for a well in the Cumberland country in June. Her arm touched something soft before it touched the bottom. Something soft that broke apart at contact. Sediment. Rosalind plunged the jar into the sediment of the bed. She filled it, she capped it, she took it out. The jar came out covered with a thin layer of greenish-grey mud. She wiped it with the glove. She put it away. Before starting to climb up, she stayed a moment longer, both hands on the rungs, her face near the inner wall of the well, looking about 40 centimeters above the surface of the water. In the wall there was a horizontal fissure about 10 centimeters long. From the fissure there was a very slow drip, one drop every 15 or 20 seconds. The drop fell into the water without making a sound. The drop left on the edge of the fissure, on the stone, a blue-green stain with a yellow halo. That stain was the lateral spring, the seepage. What for a century and a quarter had been entering the well from the subsoil of the neighboring lot. Rosalind looked at it for a long time, 40 seconds, a minute. She wrote in the dark green notebook, propped against the wall by the light of the headlamp. Lateral fissure approximately 40 centimeters above water level. North side, neighboring lot. Active dripping. Green and yellow concretion on the stone. Take sample of the concretion next time with a spatula. She closed the notebook. She put it away. She began to climb up. Climbing up was harder than climbing down. Her knees, her shoulders, the weight of the full jars hanging from the belt. She climbed, counting backward. 28, 27, 26. At the 14th rung, she allowed herself a 30-second rest, with her forearms propped on a rung, her forehead against another. Then she continued. 14, 13, 12. When she had 4 rungs left, she saw the sky above the curb. The moon was no longer there, it had moved. There was only the reddish darkness of the suspended dust. She got to the top. She lifted her leg over the curb. She came out of the well. She sat on the curb with her legs hanging inside. She breathed. She breathed deep. Her hands hurt. She had scrapes on her palms from the rungs. She pulled off the nitrile gloves. The palms were a little darker still than they had been in the afternoon. Or maybe it was the exhaustion and bad light. She would not decide. She wrote down the time. 2:47 in the morning of June 29th, 2024. She went into the house. She went up to the bedroom. She arranged the 7 jars on a small table in order by depth, labeled. She took off her boots. She lay down. She did not sleep well. She dreamed of her father. Her father was standing in front of a greenish-grey wall and was telling her something she could not quite hear. At 9 in the morning, she was already getting ready for the meeting with Mr. Elwood at the Clock Cafe. She bathed with bottled water heated on the burner, a technique she had been practicing for weeks. She put on a simple beige dress, comfortable shoes. The glasses for reading hung on a cord at her neck. She put into a cloth bag the jars, double-bagged in a tightly closed Ziploc, the dark green notebook, the printed results that Renee had sent her on the 14th, and the wine notebook with the complete records of symptoms and observations since May 17th. She was not going to hand over any of that. She brought it as backup, discreet artillery. At 11 sharp, she walked into the Clock Cafe. Mr. Elwood was already there at the table in the back, dressed identically to the night before, except this time his tie was olive green. He had an Americano in front of him and a green leather notebook open, the famous green notebook of the town. "Mrs. Rosalind, come, come." Rosalind sat down. The waitress came over. She ordered a pot coffee and a slice of sourdough bread. "Mr. Elwood, I appreciate that you came. By all means. You are now a resident of our town. A resident of honor, I would say, for having taken on the house that nobody wanted. That is why I wanted to speak with you, to understand the history well. That is what I am here for. That is what the town modestly pays me for." Mr. Elwood smiled. A broad smile. White. Rehearsed. He sipped his coffee. He waited. Rosalind opened the cloth bag. She took out the dark green notebook, still closed, without showing the contents. She put it down on the table next to her cup. "Mr. Elwood, my question is direct, if you will allow me. Do you believe in the curse of the Riverstone house?" Mr. Elwood laughed. A small laugh. Polite. "Mrs. Rosalind, that is a question I have been asked many times. I am a historian. I am a town historian. I neither believe nor disbelieve. I record. And I tell you the facts are this. 7 owners, 7 deaths in less than a year each time. That does not explain itself. And what hypothesis have you considered to explain it? Hypothesis, no. Versions. Versions that the town has built up. The Cherokee burial ground, the pact of Mr. Anastasius, the woman in mourning. I gather them. I preserve them. That is my function. Whether they are true or not true, that is up to each person. Mr. Elwood, and if I told you that the explanation is chemical? Mr. Elwood set his cup down slowly on the saucer. The smile stayed, but his eyes changed. They became smaller, quieter. Chemical, Mrs. Rosalind? Chemical. I am a retired pharmaceutical chemist from the Department of Public Health. I worked for 15 years in the Federal Chronic Endemic Arsenic Program in the Cumberland Valley. I have been living in the Riverstone house for 43 days. I have taken samples from the courtyard soil, from the roots of the apple tree, from the dust under the eave, and as of last night, from the well water at various depths. I have preliminary results from the soil. The results from the water I am expecting next week. Mr. Elwood did not say anything. The smile started to deflate. The soil in the courtyard of the apple tree has arsenic at 142 parts per million. The residential threshold is 22. Total chromium at 380 parts per million. Lead at 95. Those are levels consistent with historical discharge of textile effluents aggravated by geogenic arsenic from the region. Likely from the Laurel Mountain Mills. Their backyard was here. Mrs. Cleophas Mireless, daughter of a worker at the mill, confirmed it to me. Discharger of green sludge between 1899 and 1925. Mr. Elwood cleared his throat. Mrs. Rosalind, I am not a scientist, but allow me to tell you that those data, if they exist, would not explain 7 deaths over the course of 127 years. People die for many reasons. Yes, they explain it. They explain it perfectly. Chronic exposure to arsenic in household well water produces non-specific symptoms for months or years before recognizable clinical manifestations. In each era, doctors diagnose what the medicine of their time allows them to diagnose. In 1899, it was inflammation of the liver. In 1926, pulmonary complication. In 1989, sudden heart attack. In 2013, fulminant heart attack. Each diagnosis is consistent with the medicine of its time and with the general picture of chronic heavy metal poisoning. If you take the 7 death certificates and lay them out on a table, you will see that the symptoms that led to each diagnosis look more like each other than they look like the diseases that were finally written on the paper. Mrs. Rosalind, Mr. Elwood, I beg you not to make those conclusions public yet. That sentence, said like that, with that precision, confirmed for Rosalind something she had already sensed. The historian was not surprised. He was not discovering anything at that moment. He was protecting. Why not, Mr. Elwood? Because our town is a heritage town, because we live off tourism, because the history of the Riverstone house in its current form draws visitors and leaves a significant economic flow in the historic district, because there are families that depend on that flow, because you, with all respect, arrived 43 days ago, and we have been here for 400 years. Mr. Elwood, there are other families too. The family of Mr. Anastasius, the family of the fur trader from Cumberland, the family of Mr. Frederick Trevino Carlton, who died in 2013, and whose children sold the house because they could not live with that. What do I tell them? Mrs. Rosalind, this is delicate. Allow me to consult with the town mayor. Allow us together to see what the best way is to handle the information. Mr. Elwood, I do not handle information. I verify. When the results from the water arrive, if they confirm what the soil already shows, those results will be turned over to the Environmental Protection Agency, to the Federal Water Authority, and to the Department of Public Health. By professional obligation and by ethical obligation, I cannot hold on to that. Mr. Elwood slowly closed the green notebook. He left 2 bills on the table, more than the coffee's cost. Mrs. Rosalind, I am going to ask you a favor. Wait until we have the complete results. Before doing anything, let us talk again. A week, 10 days, out of respect for the town. Mr. Elwood, I will give you until the water results arrive. When they arrive, we will sit down again. If the results are what I expect, I will comply with the law. If they are different, I will be the first to acknowledge it and to file the matter away. Thank you, Mrs. Rosalind. Thank you. Mr. Elwood. He stood up. He said goodbye with a short bow. He walked out of the Clock Cafe. On the way, before reaching the door, he took his cell phone out of his pocket and started dialing a number. Rosalind stayed sitting. She finished the pot coffee. She nibbled at the bread. She wrote in the dark green notebook the entire conversation, as close to verbatim as she could. When she finished, she looked out the window toward the square. In the square, the young man from the fresh juice stand, Little Ray, was arranging the glass containers with the different juices: hibiscus, horchata, quince, cantaloupe. Little Ray's sister was studying nursing in Cumberland City. That had stuck with Rosalind for some reason. She thought that one day that young woman, then a nurse, might read this case in some public health manual. She thought probably not. That probably this case, if it followed the normal course of things in the country, was going to end up filed away in some drawer of the regional health office, with a label of isolated case, and nobody was going to use it to teach anybody anything. But that thought, Rosalind decided, was no reason not to do it. A pharmaceutical chemist does not decide what gets done with what she finds. She decides to find it. The rest is outside her jurisdiction. She closed the notebook. She paid. She left. The results from the water arrived 10 days later, on July 9, 2024, by email. Again from Dr. Renee Sinclair Oliver. This time, Rosalind opened the email in Marielle's apartment in Knoxville. She had traveled the day before with the excuse of visiting her niece, but really to review the results in the company of another medical mind. Marielle read the email over Rosalind's shoulder. Arsenic in well water. Sample from the surface level. 187 micrograms per liter. World Health Organization threshold, 10. Federal regulation threshold, 25. Almost 8 times above the federal limit. Arsenic at 1 meter, 211 micrograms per liter. At 3 meters, 246. At 6 meters, 298. In sediment from the bed, 412. Total chromium in surface water, 187 micrograms per liter. Federal threshold, 50. Almost 4 times above. Hexavalent chromium, the most toxic form, 94 micrograms per liter. Threshold, 50. Almost double. Lead in water, 38 micrograms per liter. Threshold, 10. Almost 4 times. Cadmium, 12. Threshold, 5. More than double. Marielle read to the end. Then she read the technical observations Renee had added at the end of the email. Renee wrote that the patterns were consistent with 2 overlapping sources, one geogenic, native to the subsoil of the semi-arid region of the Cumberland country, and the other anthropogenic, especially the presence of hexavalent chromium, which is not geogenic but industrial, historically associated with textile dye processes and tanneries. Renee said she recommended closing the well immediately and notifying the federal environmental and health authorities. Marielle closed the laptop. Aunt. Dear. Aunt. You are not going back to that house. Dear, I have to go back one time. Just once. To get the notebooks. The 380 of them. And the clothes. And the documents. I'll go with you. No, dear. I am going alone. And I am going with Mrs. Clearfer. Mrs. Clearfer deserves to be there. Aunt, the complaint? Tomorrow morning. I am going with an attorney I know here in Knoxville. We will prepare the formal complaint to the Environmental Protection Agency and to the Federal Water Authority. We will attach the soil and water results. We will request an environmental emergency declaration for the property and for the neighboring property. We will notify the Federal Department of Public Health and the State Public Health Laboratory. And we will send a copy, a signed and sealed copy, to the Town Council and to the historian. To the historian? To the historian. As a courtesy, a copy, but not before the official copies. Then Marielle hugged her. She hugged her for a long time. Rosalind did not cry. Marielle did. That night of July 9th, in the guest room of Marielle's apartment in the Technologico neighborhood of Knoxville, Rosalind went to bed late. She had the light on. She had the wine notebook open. She was making the complete summary of the exposure. Time of habitation at the moment of the results, 54 days. Symptoms recorded: light beginning palmar hyperpigmentation, episodic metallic taste, single dizziness episode of 3 seconds, non-specific fatigue on 2 occasions, symptoms not yet present, palmar plantar hyperkeratosis, Bowen lesions, peripheral polyneuropathy, acute gastrointestinal episodes. Prognosis: the exposure had been brief enough, and the intake of well water low enough, because she had only used bottled water for drinking and cooking, that there should be no irreversible damage. The palmar hyperpigmentation would reverse in 1 to 3 years. The rest no long-term consequences if exposure ceased immediately. That is to say, she was going to be saved. Barely, but saved. The previous 7, no. They had not known what they were breathing, drinking, eating. The difference between life and death in this case had been a federal program in the Valley between 1989 and 2004, to which Rosalind had been assigned, and which had taught her to recognize the clinical picture. She closed the notebook. She turned off the light. Before sleeping, one more pause. You who are here listening. Technical knowledge is sometimes a loneliness, a very specific loneliness. It is not the loneliness of having no one. It is the loneliness of knowing something the others would rather not hear. A pharmaceutical chemist is a woman who in the middle of a family gathering can look at someone's plate and say, "That stew turned out well. What did you put in it?" Knowing perfectly well that the strange green in the sauce can be one thing or another, and choosing to say nothing that night, because there are tables where what is sought is not the truth. It is dinner. It is being together. It is Sunday night. That choice, the choice to stay quiet, sometimes a chemist also makes it. But there are cases in which you cannot stay quiet. There are cases in which silence is complicity with the next death. And the Riverstone house, Rosalind decided that night in Knoxville, was one of those cases. She slept 4 hours. At 8 in the morning on July 10th, she was sitting in front of the desk of attorney Eugene Salinas Quesada, an environmental lawyer of 54 years old. With an office in the central area of Knoxville, she handed him all the documentation. The attorney took 3 hours to read it. When he finished, he looked up and said 2 words. "It is complete." That afternoon, the formal complaint was drafted. That same afternoon, it was filed at the state offices of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Federal Water Authority. That night, already with a date stamp, Rosalind sent the copy to the town council with receipt, and she sent by certified mail another copy to the State Public Health Laboratory. To the historian, she sent nothing. To the historian, she planned to tell him in person. The next day, July 11th, Rosalind traveled to the town with Marielle. They arrived at 11 in the morning. They went directly to the house. Mrs. Cleofer was waiting for them in the front hall with her apron on in her calm way. Rosalind had called her the day before and had given her a short version of the facts. Mrs. Cleofer had listened in long silence. Then she had said, "Mrs. Rosalind, my daddy was right, I'll come." The 3 women went into the house. In 5 hours they took out the 380 notebooks from the cabinet, the clothes, the documents, the samples not yet sent, the jars from the well, the record books, the glasses, the 3 chemistry books that Rosalind had brought with her, a small framed photograph of Rosalind's father that was on the bedside table, and nothing more. The furniture stayed behind, the wrought iron bed, the cedar wardrobe, the wicker chair, the Persian rug, everything. Mrs. Cleofer, when they finished, stood in front of the fruitless apple tree. She said, "Poor tree, it wasn't your fault." Then she walked away. The news took 11 days to reach the town. It arrived on July 22nd, when a Federal Environmental Protection Agency officer, with a National Guard escort, showed up on the neighboring lot of the Riverstone house, identified in the complaint as the site of the historic discharge yard of the Laurel Mountain Mills, to begin the technical survey that would lead to the Environmental Emergency Declaration. That same afternoon, the town mayor called an extraordinary meeting of the council. That night, Mr. Helwood Garrison Maddox published on the Facebook page of the official historian of the town a long text titled, "In Defense of Our History Against Outside Versions." The text did not mention Rosalind by name. It did mention a recent outsider person who intends to destroy an intangible cultural heritage with so-called analyses with no official validity. The text had 100 reactions in 12 hours, most of them angry. Rosalind read the post in Marielle's apartment in Knoxville, where she had stayed provisionally to live. She read the comments. Most of them defended the historian. They accused her of being greedy, of being arrogant, of being a foreigner, of having come to dirty the name of the town. A few comments defended her timidly, without signing their full names. Those comments, Rosalind noticed, were deleted by the page administrator within hours. Marielle, reading the same things in the living room, said, "Aunt, don't read any more." "I have to read, dear. I need to know what is being said." "That isn't information, Aunt, that is noise." "It is both things, dear, and sometimes the noise is also information." The town assembly was called for July 30th. It was formally called by the town council, pressured by a signature collection that the historian had pushed forward. The official topic was information about the federal actions on the historic property adjacent to the Riverstone house. The real topic everyone knew was what to do about Rosalind. Attorney Salinas advised Rosalind not to attend. "Mrs. Rosalind, it is going to be a moral ambush. You have nothing to gain by going." "Sir, I have everything to gain by going." "Please, reconsider." "Reconsidered, I am going." On July 30th, 2024, at 6 in the evening, in the main hall of the community center of the town, there were 320 people, some standing in the aisles, others outside on the street, listening through the open windows. It was the most attended assembly in the recent memory of the town. In the front row was the town mayor. To his right, the historian, Elwood Garrison Maddox. To his left, 2 council members. In the second row, Rosalind Tilford Eskridge. In her simple beige dress, the glasses hanging from her neck, her hands on her lap, the dark green notebook closed on her left thigh. Alone. Marielle and Attorney Salinas were outside in the front hall, at her request. The historian spoke first. He spoke for 40 minutes. He spoke of the intangible cultural heritage of the town. He spoke of the Riverstone house as the black jewel of the town. He spoke of tourism. He spoke of the jobs in the historic district. He spoke of the generations of townspeople who had taken care of this history. He spoke of the outsiders who arrive without understanding. He spoke of the science that sometimes is wrong. He spoke of the laboratories that are sometimes paid by dark interests. He spoke of loyalty to the town. He closed by saying that he, as historian, would formally ask the town council to dismiss the chemical versions and to defend the Riverstone house as an untouchable cultural asset. He was applauded. He was applauded heavily, some of them standing. Then the town mayor spoke. He tried to balance things. He acknowledged that there were federal procedures underway and that the town could not interfere. But he stood with the historian in defending local culture. He asked for respect for the 2 positions. Then it was Rosalind's turn. She stood up. She walked to the podium. She adjusted the glasses on her face. She opened the dark green notebook. The people were watching her in silence. A heavy silence, not neutral, a silence that weighed against her. Rosalind spoke for 18 minutes. She spoke in a calm voice, without raising it, without lowering it. She spoke of the geogenic arsenic documented in the Cumberland Valley by federal agencies since the 1960s. She spoke of hexavalent chromium and how it is identified chemically, step by step. She spoke of the file on the Laurel Mountain Mills in the State Archive, a file she had consulted through Attorney Salinas, in which there were records of sanitary inspections from 1908 and 1917 that already mentioned discharges with anomalous coloration in the backyard of the mill. She spoke of the cross-reference between the 7 death diagnoses of the owners of the Riverstone house and the clinical pictures consistent with chronic heavy metal poisoning. She spoke of the federal regulation thresholds. She spoke of the specific results from the soil and from the well water. She read the numbers out loud, twice. And at the end she said this: "I did not come to this town to dirty anything. I came to this town because I saw a house for sale at a low price, and I bought it. Then, in 43 days, I found what any chemist of my training would have found in 43 days. The difference between the previous 7 and me is not luck. It is that they were not chemists. The curse of the Riverstone House is not a Cherokee burial ground. It is a well dug in 1947 that crosses an aquifer contaminated by historical textile discharges and by background geogenic arsenic. That is not a matter of opinion, that is measurable, and it has been measured. The results are at the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Water Authority, and the Federal Department of Public Health since July 10th. What you decide to do today in this room does not change the results. It only changes the kind of town you want to be. Good evening. She closed the notebook. She returned to her seat. Nobody applauded. There were a few seconds of silence. Then an older woman in the fourth row began to applaud slowly. 3 more people joined her. Then nobody else. The applause died out in 5 seconds. The town mayor spoke again. He said that the council would meet in private session the next day, that any official position would come out afterward, that the assembly was adjourned. Rosalind walked out through the side door. Marielle and the attorney were waiting for her. They walked the 3 blocks to the inn where they were staying that night without speaking. Halfway there, on Main Street, a woman whom Rosalind did not know crossed paths with them. She stopped. She looked Rosalind in the eyes and she said, "Thank you, ma'am." Then she kept walking, without waiting for an answer. Rosalind stopped a moment. Marielle hugged her by the shoulders. "That woman, dear, write her down for me." "We're not going to see her again, Aunt." "It doesn't matter, write her down for me, there was one." Marielle, that same night, wrote down in her aunt's dark green notebook 1 line. July 30th, 2024, 1948 hours. Main Street. An unknown woman, approximately 55 years old, brown hair, grey sweater, 1 word, "Thank you." That was the only one. The council the next day issued a tepid statement. It acknowledged the federal actions underway. It defended the cultural heritage of the town. It did not mention Rosalind, nor did it thank her. Mr. Elwood published another long text on Facebook saying that the battle for the truth of the town continued. But the federal procedures kept their course. The Environmental Protection Agency in September 2024 declared a contaminated site on the neighboring lot, identified in the property registry as Urban Lot Number 47 on Main Street, an inheritance passed down from generation to generation among the descendants of a former administrator of the mill. The Federal Water Authority in October ordered the definitive closure of the well of the Riverstone House and of 3 other household wells within a radius of 200 meters. The State Department of Public Health in November ran analyses on the current inhabitants of those 3 neighboring houses, 18 people in total. Of the 18, 12 tested positive for arsenic in urine above the threshold, 5 with beginning palmar hyperpigmentation, 2 with mild peripheral neuropathy, not previously diagnosed. Those people were enrolled in a federal medical follow-up program. The procedures continued in 2025. Partial remediation of the neighboring lot began in March. It consisted of removing the first 2 layers of soil down to a depth of 2 meters and transporting the material to a controlled containment facility in eastern Tennessee. The work lasted 14 months. It cost $18 million from the federal treasury. There was no commemorative plaque. There was no public acknowledgement of the citizen finding. The file was archived. The Riverstone House, without its well, and declared a residential risk zone by the Environmental Protection Agency, could not be inhabited as a residence again. Rosalind, the legal owner of the property, had to decide what to do with it. Attorney Salinas suggested she donate it. Rosalind donated it to the town in May 2025, with a deeded condition that the town council accepted reluctantly. The house would be turned into a documentary archive open to the public about the case. All the chemical documentation, the files, the records, the dark green notebook, and the 380 notebooks would be deposited there. Any person could consult them. The historian resigned from his post in July 2025, citing personal reasons. The town council did not appoint anyone in his place right away. The house was rehabilitated as an archive between August 2025 and May 2026. The rehabilitation was financed by a regional foundation devoted to environmental memory. The day of the opening, June 14, 2026, there was a small ceremony. 25 people attended. Neither the town mayor nor the council members came. Dr. Renee Sinclair Oliver did attend. She came from Knoxville. Marielle attended. Mrs. Cleophas Mireles Ballard attended with 2 of her neighbors. The unknown woman in the grey sweater, who had said thank you in July 2024, attended. This time she identified herself. Her name was Aurora Garibaldi Tigert. She was the daughter-in-law of one of the 7 dead owners, the one who had lasted 18 months, the resistant one, and she had been searching for 30 years for someone who could explain to her why her father-in-law had died. A young librarian newly hired by the town to take care of the archive attended. A young man of 26 named Camden Bannon, who had studied library science at the State University. 2 regional journalists also attended, one from the Knoxville Vanguard and one from the Cumberland Herald. Rosalind spoke for 5 minutes. She thanked Mrs. Cleophas. She thanked Marielle. She thanked Renee. She thanked Aurora. She thanked the technicians of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Federal Water Authority by name. She did not thank the town council. She did not speak of the curse, nor of the historian. She only said that the house, from now on, would be a place where people could come to understand how the invisible gets measured. At the end of the ceremony, while the others helped themselves to coffee and cookies in the courtyard of the apple tree, the young librarian Camden approached Rosalind with a notebook in his hand. "Mrs. Rosalind, excuse me, I am going to be working here with the archive. I wanted to ask you, if it is no trouble, to explain to me the system in which your notebooks are organized." "Let's go inside, Camden." They went into the old cellar of the house, which now was the reading room of the archive. On 3 shelves of walnut wood, newly installed, rested in perfect rows the 380 notebooks. Rosalind had come during the previous days, before the opening, to arrange them herself. They were ordered chronologically from 1968 to 2026. With the 4 notebooks of the case of the Riverstone house grouped apart on their own small shelf, the grey, the wine, the dark green, and a 4th, the tobacco one, in which Rosalind had written the complete narrative summary of the process, step by step, so that any person in the future could reconstruct it. She explained the system to Camden for 40 minutes. Camden took notes in his notebook with clean handwriting. He asked her good technical questions. Rosalind felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was transmitting something to someone who was going to take care of it. When the explanation was over, Camden closed his notebook and said, "Mrs. Rosalind, can I ask you a personal question?" "Tell me, young man. After all this, do you live in the town?" "I live. I rented a small house on the other side of town, near the road that goes to Knoxville. A small house with municipal water, verified water. That part I did verify before I signed the contract. And the people of the town? The people of the town greet me little. Some of them do not greet me at all. Mr. Samuel the baker, yes. Mrs. Cleophas, yes. Little Ray from the juice stand, yes. The majority, no, that is what it is. I do not expect it to change." "And does it weigh on you?" Rosalind stayed silent for a few seconds. She looked out the window at the courtyard with the apple tree. The apple tree, now without the contaminated soil at its roots, had begun in May to put out its first white flowers. It would not produce fruit yet. They would have to wait 2 or 3 years. But the flowers were there. "It weighs on me, Camden. I will not lie to you. It weighs. But there is a faint metallic taste that I no longer feel when I wake up. Before, I felt it 1 second, 2, almost every morning during those 43 days. Then, living in Knoxville, I felt it less and less. And now in the small rented house in the town, I do not feel it anymore. That will not tell you very much. To me, it tells me everything. It is the difference between being exposed and having stopped being exposed. It is a difference I know better than almost anyone. And that difference, Camden, that difference is what I made possible for the ones who come next, for the ones who came to live near here. The people of the town do not thank me for it. But the difference is there. I know it. That is enough for me." Camden nodded. He did not say anything. Rosalind adjusted one notebook that had slid 1 millimeter out of the row. They walked out of the reading room. They walked to the front hall. They said goodbye with a handshake. Camden stayed inside in his new office. Rosalind walked out onto Main Street. She walked the 14 blocks to the rented small house on the other side of town. The June sun fell on the limestone walls. There was no dust storm that afternoon. A clean sky and the golden light, typical of the Cumberland country at that hour. On the way she crossed paths with two people who knew her and who greeted her with a small nod of the head. She greeted them the same. She arrived at the small house. She opened the door, she went in. She poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the table. Municipal water. Verified. She sat down on the kitchen chair. She took out the newest notebook, the 381st, just begun. She wrote down the date, June 14th, 2026, the time 18:32 hours, the approximate temperature 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Then she wrote underneath one single line. She had done what she had to do. She closed the notebook. She poured herself another glass of water. She drank it slowly, looking out the window. Out on the street, an old pickup truck went by with the radio on. The local station was playing a song from one of the old mountain bands. The same song that had played one June night in 2024, when she was walking home to the Riverstone house, feeling for the first time the faint metallic taste in her mouth, and still not knowing anything of what she would come to know later. The song faded down the street. Rosalind stayed sitting a little longer. Then she got up. She washed the glass. She set it to drain. She turned off the kitchen light, and she went to her room. And here, you who have made it to the end, one last thing from the one who has been telling you this. You have heard the story of a woman who bought a house that killed its owners, and who, instead of dying or leaving, did the only thing her profession asked her to do. She measured, and she measured, and she recorded, and she delivered the data to the ones it should be delivered to. You have heard also how the town where this happened decided in the majority not to thank her for it. Some towns prefer a pretty legend to an uncomfortable truth. Some legends kill more slowly than poisons, but they kill too. And sometimes it takes an older retired woman with a pocket notebook in her hand for someone to put a name to what for a century had no name. If this story moved something in you, write in the comments one word, just one. Whatever comes to you, any word. I'm going to read them all. And if you can, give the video the applause of a like, which is what helps stories like this one walk to more people. And if you want to stay here listening to more stories, subscribe to the channel, because the next one is already on its way. Take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and above all, take care of what you drink, what you breathe, what you walk on,